was a custom house in 1912, designed for the druggist Edgar Warfield, Jr., and built by Joseph F. Rogers of South Fairfax Street, who also built 106 West Rosemont. This picture also appeared in the promotional booklet. This is a Speeden drawing of the front elevation of number 207, still in its moldy, wrinkled condition, badly in need of restoration. And this is the way the house looked around 1992. You'll recognize those molded ornaments and brackets under the eaves, similar to those on the Mediterranean Revival at 19 West Rosemont. Next door at 211 West Walnut, on the corner of Northview Terrace, is this Georgian Revival. It has one of the two most imposing exteriors in Rosemont, and surprisingly, it too was designed by Speeden and Speeden in 1913. However, in the interior, one sees signs of their craftsman style: a beamed dining room ceiling, a brick fireplace surround, and, originally, a set of stile steps, not Georgian features. We may find that William did this design and Albert the others. This is an elevation of the right side, in fairly good condition. This house was built for William Swan, one of the Swan brothers who had the dry goods store at King and Pitt Streets. The drawings were signed near the bottom by him and by the builder, Samuel Devon. Mr. Swan must have been terribly proud of this house. He had a touring car said to have cost $1,100, and when he first tried to drive it up the Walnut Street hill to his house, the low-slung car scraped bottom in the back, so he had to park at a neighbor's farther down. Then one day he discovered by accident that he could back up the hill, so ever thereafter that's what he did, or so the story goes. This house at 406 Northview was probably designed by the Speedens in 1912 or 1913 for S. Russell Bowen, but we have no photographic record of original drawings. Frank Tonsey may have been the contractor. These photos show two of the earliest houses on Lower Walnut, number 9 and number 18, respectively, both built in 1913 as mirror images in design. They turned up in the Speeden collection as undated blueprints, but bore no indication of the Speeden firm. They were instead labeled W.A. Devon. We suspect that this was William, son of the builder Samuel Devon, and that he may have been apprenticed to the Speedens at the time. This shows the original blueprint of the front elevation of 9 West Walnut, designed by W.A. Devon. Note that the steps extend across the front. Were they originally built that way, or was the plan changed before construction? We do know that the gable was originally half-timbered. With this example, we move on from the Speedens' contributions to Rosemont. Before we leave West Walnut, we'll look at two other houses. First, two views of this delightful 19th century house with the flavor of the Queen Anne style at 203 West Walnut. This is the one moved from Maryland that was being reconstructed in 1912 in that street scene. It still has its stickwork. This house at 204 West Walnut was probably the work of the popular builder Julian D. Knight, who also built all or most of the 30 Rucker-Johnston houses. This one was built for Frederick H. Treat in the winter of 1912 and 1913. You'll remember he was president of both the Trolley Company and the RDC, but there is no evidence that he ever left Philadelphia to live here, instead apparently renting the house until it was sold in 1920 after his death. In the mid-20s, it became the home of Judge Howard W. Smith, who distinguished himself in the U.S. Congress as chairman of the House Rules Committee and author of the Smith Act. His family lived in the house until 1977. A much later house by Julian Knight at 2407 King Street is located just above the level of Walnut. It was built in 1924 for his daughter Dorothy at the time of her marriage to Frank Fannin, son of T.J. Fannin, founder of the Fuel Oil Company. This is a handsome example of the colonial revival style. Back to our pre-World War I period. Another fine colonial revival was built in early 1913 at the corner of West Rosemont and Russell Road, number 100 West Rosemont, for Dr. Richard Gibson, who had Gibson's Drug Store at 824 King Street. The Gibsons are said to have switched houses with the Holdens, who had the library addition and attached greenhouse built. We didn't turn up either the architect or the builder of the original house, but we know that Ira E. Cannon of Rosemont designed and built these additions in the 1930s, and you'll be seeing more of his work. The house has been known for the beautiful camellias that surrounded it. In 1915, Rosemont was finally taken into the city of Alexandria by an annexation that the city had been pressing for years, with reluctant county folk who didn't want their taxes to go up. This map shows annexations of both 1915 and 1929, and also shows the extent of Potomac Yards and its closeness to Rosemont. This house at 310 Northview Terrace was built for Harry Hammond by W. L. Morton and A. D. Brown the year before America entered World War I, and it shows elements from several earlier styles effectively combined: craftsman brackets, a Palladian influence window, and a Queen Anne polygonal bay, seen in this side view. It was designed by an Alexandria architect, William L. Clark, and built for $6,200 in 1916. Working in that same year was an interesting builder who specialized in bungalows and who planned his own houses, perhaps choosing designs from magazines, but he had good taste. He was John Smithdale of nearby Cherrydale, and he built this large craftsman bungalow, number 101 West Cedar, at the corner of Cedar and Russell in 1916. This is the way it used to look in 1985, with the simple facade and entry. And this is the way it was transformed in 1989. The same shingle patterns were carried over to the deep rear addition, and the result was very effective, but the entry area was reworked, giving it a different aspect. Very quickly, these are other Smithdale bungalows. 6 West Cedar Street, designed from a picture or plan in the Bungalow magazine, and built in 1916, of hollow tile, like the Rucker-Johnston houses. And this nice one at 16 West Cedar, built by H.C. Ball in 1917. And another 1917 house at 15 West Rosemont, which by about 1990 was significantly enlarged at the rear in a very unobtrusive and compatible way. In contrasting style, this well-designed colonial revival at the curve of Northview Terrace, number 206, was worked on over at least a 2-year period in the mid-teens, with meticulous design work by the architect William I. Deming of the well-known Washington firm of Don and Deming. The house here in rear view was built for Richard Acton, an Alexandria jeweler. The same large arched window in the main stairwell is found in the back of this 1916-1917 colonial revival at 106 West Rosemont, designed by Waddy Butler Wood, who was a partner in Wood, Don, and Deming in earlier years, before he set up an independent practice about 1913. Waddy Wood was a prolific Washington architect who designed the Woodrow Wilson House and at least 18 others in Kalorama, as well as the Chinese Embassy, the Masonic Temple that later became the National Museum for Women in the Arts, and scores of others. His interiors have a distinctive quality, often set off by fine mantelpieces, examples of which may be found among the 5 specimens at 106 West Rosemont. The builder of this house was Joseph F. Rogers. We want to make some points about 1918, the end of World War I, with this 1921 Sanborn insurance map. Please excuse the poor photograph. During the war, the Washington, Alexandria, and Mount Vernon trolley line was so pressed to expand its service with 40 new cars, for example, to meet the wartime needs of this area, that it was financially weakened and never really recovered. It is conceivable that there was enough intermingling of the financial affairs of the trolley company and the Rosemont Development Company that the trolley's debt was linked with that of the RDC. In any case, the RDC was in serious financial difficulty by June of 1918. So the stockholders voted to sell all of their unsold lots scattered west of the trolley tracks, plus all of their land east of the tracks, to the General Realty Corp. Taylor Burke, the banker, was president of General Realty about that time, but officers changed frequently. They had this new Section 4 platted and started putting up houses east of Hoof's Run at a great rate in late 1918. Whether they were targeting the shipyard workers or the railroad workers, or both, we don't know. But the area was considered separate from the older Rosemont, with the trolley tracks and a wide swath of undeveloped land in between. About 1922, F.C. Goodnow's construction company began to build on lots on West Linden, West Maple, and Russell Road, and it's of interest to note that he was president of General Realty in 1924. Then, much later, in 1938 and 39, he put up his rows of townhouses along Commonwealth Avenue and the adjacent side streets east of the avenue, and the gap was filled. Meanwhile, the Rucker-Johnston subdivision was also rapidly built in the winter of 1919 and 20 on land that George H. Rucker had acquired from the Chapman estate in 1899, one of his many real estate holdings, when he was clerk of the county court. He too became financially overextended before his death in September 1919, and the 5 3/4 acre tract was sold to a developer named L. Morgan Johnston for $15,000, thus the name Rucker-Johnston. 30 hollow tile houses were built by contractor Julian Knight by 10 Designs, for which building permits survived for 7, and a J.A. Clark was listed as the designer of those 7, but we have never found out who he was. One can read in this January 1920 ad from a Washington paper that North Rosemont was considered in the country, and the houses that hadn't been altered much, here number 300 Rucker Place, and here number 603 Johnston Place, both built in 1919 and 20, do have textured materials and colors that blend in with the natural setting. This design, number 305 Rucker Place, is hardly recognizable in this painted and embellished version at 611 Northview Terrace, which is very attractive. And at 303 Rucker Place, this vintage version of another design, with its intriguing roof system, has become this version at 309 Rucker Place, with the addition of a porch railing and a ribbon of windows. The 1920s were lively years for the young people in Rosemont. After a snowstorm, they would build a bonfire at the top of the Walnut Street Hill and sled down to Russell Road, where a policeman would often stand guard. But there were some close calls. Lester Van Middlesworth remembers when the policeman broke his leg saving a sledder from a car that ignored his whistle. The most prolific builder in the 20s, besides F.C. Goodnow, was a man named Ira Cannon, who designed and built at least 14 houses in the historic district, and thus left his mark on Rosemont, as he did in Manassas, where he learned his trade as a hands-on builder from his father, whom he had helped to build the Robert Portner Mansion, Annaburg. Ira Cannon at first commuted to put up at least 2 early houses in 1916, this one at 21 West Cedar, photographed in 1985, which now looks like this, and a second house at 10 West Rosemont. Another Cannon house from 1920 is this one at 107 West Linden Street. And then he built this house for himself in 1921 on lower West Linden, but it has been drastically changed with glass bricks and the removal of its raised porch. Cannon soon had some of the choice projects in the neighborhood he now lived in. Here, the handsome 1923 colonial revival at 123 West Maple, where lived the lively Susan Thompson, later Lipscomb, whom kids loved to see zipping by in her big Packard convertible, with both a Great Dane and a descented skunk beside her. And Cannon did this house at 301 Northview for Dr. Richard Gibson, who kept moving around Rosemont. Cannon's daughter told us that he himself designed almost all the houses he built in accordance with his clients' needs and wishes, and always urged them to put in a second bathroom. Finished in 1928 or 29, this is the latest house attributed to Ira E. Cannon in the Historic District. It is at 412 Northview and has this handsome Georgian Revival doorway. There may be an architect that will turn up for one of these, but now the only Cannon house known not to have been also designed by him is this graceful house on Upper Maple, number 116, which was designed by William I. Deming in 1928, after he left the Don and Deming firm in Washington, and finished in 1929. The last architect we have for you is Francis Drischler, reputedly a German, who lived at 605 Northview in Rucker-Johnston and designed this 1924 house at 301 West Walnut for his neighbor, William P. Wools, an attorney and later a judge. The design is unusual, with the original roof gambrelled on only one side. The later addition on the right was by W. W. Burroughs, another Rosemonter. In 1927, Drischler also designed this fine Georgian Revival at 510 Northview for another neighbor from Rucker-Johnston, Urban Lambert, head of the water company. It was built by T.J. Marsden, and all of the floors are said to be concrete. There is a ballroom on the third floor. The last two builders we want to mention are first Peter Dubourg, who designed and built this Elm Street landmark, number 505, for himself in 1927, and also this neat house a few doors up the street at 206 Elm, built in 1927 and 28. Because we have mostly concentrated on the earlier periods of building in Rosemont, to limit the length of this presentation, we will only touch lightly on a prolific builder who was working in the 20s and 30s. F.C. Goodnow and his son Henry built at least 35 houses in the Historic District in the 20s, chiefly on Linden, Maple, and the 400 block of Russell Road. The Goodnows used a wide range of styles. This is one at 7 West Linden Street, and another at 10 West Linden, both built in 1922 or 23. Here is another style at 16 West Maple, built in 1924. With this attractive house, built in 1925 at 108 West Maple, the Goodnows gave an appealing flair to a shirt-waisted design, and they used their growing experience to build and probably design this house at 8 West Maple Street for F.C.'s daughter and her husband, Margaret and James Armstrong, in 1926. James Armstrong was another builder of Rosemont houses. F.C. Goodnow himself lived in this house at one time. A full-length front porch was removed many years ago. The Goodnows are probably best known for the sets of brick and stone colonial revival townhouses that line the east side of Lower Commonwealth Avenue and portions of the adjacent streets. These were built in 1938 and 39 and presented an attractive streetscape at this gateway to Rosemont. Our last slide is this aerial view taken about 1927 as the Masonic Temple was being built on Shooter's Hill. On the right we see Duke Street with the railroad right-of-way and Diagonal Road cutting across the upper right corner. A little to the left, King Street turns near Union Station to extend past Rosemont, seen at the upper left. To the right of the reservoir, one can make out the West End School, which, as we have said, served Rosemont children until Maury School was built in 1929. The Alexandria Library has a print of this photograph from the Virginia State Library. John Patrick made this copy for the Rosemont Files in 1992.